Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Beards and Cars, my more podcast style long form series where we get into individual topics or countdowns or discussions in a much more broad but also in-depth way, where we can talk about things that really would not fit into like a 5 or 6 minute review, and of course not a tune video either. Now in this video I'm going to discuss two primary topics in particular. The first one of course is the title, the thumbnail, and the second one is briefly to touch on Polyphony's change, at least for this month, and of course that will be part of the discussion as to whether or not that will continue, but their marketing change as to how open they have been with us this month as far as teasers, releasing different info to do with the new update that came out, and we had a lot more info compared to other months as to what was coming, getting teasers for it, and really hyping up that update. So later on in the video we're going to talk about that, and even more specifically whether or not we think that that's something that Polyphony should continue to do, and if they are going to continue to do that. And I definitely have some thoughts on those things. Now first of all, I wanted to address another community suggested topic. In fact, both of the topics are, and the first one is an interesting one because it's an opportunity for you guys and myself to have more of a personal side to these discussions, because we talk about our opinions about certain things a lot, but we don't really talk about our roots as much, you know, why we love these things, not just what we love. And the question in particular was, how did I get into racing games? And of course the question applies to you as well. Now the way that I got into racing games started, not too surprisingly, very, very young. And I was actually into cars much more and much earlier than I was into racing games. I didn't start gaming until I was probably about maybe 6 or 7 years old. And it wasn't really me gaming, it was more me watching my dad game. And he would play various things on the Nintendo 64 at that point, like Zelda and Mario and a couple of others. Then we transitioned to a PlayStation 1. I believe the first game we ever had was Bugs Bunny Lost in Time, that Looney Tunes game. And then later on we started to get more into the racing side of things. One of the earliest games I can remember was Ducati World, which I talk about quite a bit on the channel, at least as often as I can justify bringing it up, because it has a very special place for me. It's a really good racing game, a really good motorbike game, one of the best, in fact, I would say, but it also had a very formative part, I think, in my upbringing of encouraging me to love motorbikes, not just Ducatis, but all of them, because had I not played that game and watched my dad playing it as well, maybe I wouldn't love motorbikes as much as I do now, because for those who don't know, although I do by far predominantly car content on the channel, I'm a huge motorbike fan. My favourite vehicle ever is a motorbike, more so than any car. So they have always had a very important place for me, but my love for cars, and well, especially for cars, but motorbikes as well, is actually older than my love for games. Because of course for some people you probably grew up and maybe got into the games and then that made you love cars. I know some friends who that kind of applied with. Whereas for me it was the other way around. The games were more of kind of a way of applying my love for cars, you could say, a way of using it, a way of experiencing it in a different way rather than reading books or looking at car mags. Now, although I don't remember it, my dad would always bring up the fact that when I was about 3 years old, I was already super into all things mechanical and cars, and especially diggers and trucks, which I guess is the case for a lot of kids, but most kids probably couldn't tell you what a car was based on its wheel rim, whereas I could at age 3. So the kind of nerddom that was there in me back then was very clearly apparent, being super into vehicles already. Now, I kind of went not completely off cars, but I went a little bit lukewarm on them through a period of, it was probably only a couple of years, but it feels like a long time because I was so young. And I got really into, of all things, predators. And I don't mean the aliens, I mean the real predators, and especially spiders and sharks. I went super obsessive into absolutely loving them. But the funny thing was, looking back at my childhood now, I did it in such a way that was very similar to what I do with cars, and that is that I would want to know all the specs, you know, the most powerful ones, the heaviest ones, the most venomous ones, the ones that kill the most people. It was very similar to the approach that I have with cars. But then it was when I was about probably 9 or 10 years old, a certain game came along on the PlayStation 2 that really reinvigorated my love for the automotive world, and I would say kickstarted it in such a way that it's never stopped since. And that little game was Gran Turismo 4. That game is incredible. It's still my favourite game of the Gran Turismo franchise. It's an incredible racing game. I featured it, of course, in my countdown of the greatest racing games ever, in my opinion, and it had such a huge effect on me. Because before that, I'd played Gran Turismo 3 and Gran Turismo 2 already, so it wasn't that I wasn't familiar with the franchise or that I didn't like it. As I've said before, I love Gran Turismo 2, but then for Gran Turismo 3, I think a combination of my age, being into the Predators for a while, as I said, and also not really liking Gran Turismo 3 that much. I know that that's blasphemy to many people because they like it the most out of the whole franchise. It seems to be a very popular game. I believe it's also Kaz's favourite, or one of his favourites, but I don't know, it just never did it for me. I never liked the graphics, I never liked the physics, and it just felt such a small game in comparison to GT2. But with that being said, Gran Turismo 4, it really got me back into it, because something that's always impressed me is just sheer scale. And Gran Turismo 4, even by today's standards, is a colossal game. It's so big, the career mode is so expansive, and the weird thing is, even though there are 500 cars less than Gran Turismo 6, it almost in a weird kind of way feels like there's more, because you actually travel around this world map, which I would still say is the best menu Gran Turismo's ever had, and look at all of these individual dealerships, and it makes there feel like there's more cars than there actually are. Whereas on GT6, it's more like just a list system, with far less interesting visuals to me. But it was really Gran Turismo 4 that fully got me back into it. It was Gran Turismo 2 that kind of started it alongside Ducati World, but then Gran Turismo 4 really solidified it. Now, through my teen years, I just went super full-on nerd with cars. I would pretty much have every conversation with everyone who I was friends with purely around cars. And although I wouldn't have admitted it at the time, I was very obsessed with being like the guy who knows everything about cars. I wanted to be the kid who could outperform these 30 or 40-year-old guys who have been in the industry for their whole life and know more than they do. And I did, than many of them. I did know more. But the stuff that I knew was irrelevant. And at the time, because I was so focused in on that, I didn't see that. And over the years since then, I've kind of forced myself to become less of a nerd. And I would say now more of a geek, because a geek is a nerd with social sense. So I try to be less so trying to beat everyone else and try to force myself to mellow out a little bit. And I'm definitely happy with that decision, because it makes you a much easier person to talk to. And at the end of the day, the only person who actually cares that you know more than everyone else is you. Nobody else cares. It actually makes you an obnoxious person to talk to, and I'm glad that I was able to self-assess that and move away from it. Now, with that in mind, of course, I still do a ton of car talk here on the channel. The whole thing is based around that, and I have pride in the stuff that I do, of course. I have all the specs written out for the videos, I do the freestyle reviews of all the cars, and I enjoy all of that. But the difference is, the way that I present it now is I like to speak in such a way with my tuning and my reviews, and I have mentioned this before, where I'm not trying to show off what I know, because at the end of the day, the purpose of this channel is not for me to show off, it's for me to help people, especially younger, more inexperienced players like I was back then. So essentially what I'm trying to do is what Gran Turismo itself is moving away from. They're taking away the tuning upgrades and taking away the information as to why those tunes are so good, and I am replacing that with my info, my tuning. Plus, of course, Polyphony is making the information about the cars themselves more and more scarce. Of course, back in Gran Turismo 2, you used to have pages and pages of information about all the cars if you wanted to read it. Whereas in effect, and I only thought of this the other day, that's kind of like what I do now. I've become the Gran Turismo info section for the cars. I give you this 7-minute breakdown of a car, its good stuff, its bad stuff, some interesting back history, and I love doing that because it clearly shows that Polyphony shouldn't have taken that away, because look how much you guys enjoy those reviews. those are essentially the same thing as the info in the game. So taking that away definitely has hurt the community, I think, because we prove that we still enjoy that. Now, as far as what I was saying about becoming less nerdy, that didn't necessarily mean that I forced myself to forget what I knew. I can still recall ridiculous specs from cars that don't really matter because that's just a part of my brain. I just made a conscious decision to stop trying to amass that information just to impress myself or to try and impress other people, because at the end of the day, they're not impressed. You become essentially like some form of weirdo who just knows everything about cars for no apparent reason. And if you like that idea, then sure, go for it. But for me, I wanted to be more than that. So over the years, my love of cars has never really changed as such. It was more the way I expressed it. I still love cars just as much. In fact, I think I love cars more than I ever have, because with age I've come to appreciate more and more vehicles. If you'd have asked me at age 10 what cars I hate, I'd have probably given you a long list. Whereas now, there are very few cars that I hate, because at the end of the day, doing reviews, doing tunes, and just covering as many games and as many car-related topics as I do, as well as being a mechanic in the real world as well and working on a number of different cars, it teaches you to appreciate the amount of effort that actually goes into every car. And that of course includes the ones that you might not like. Because at the end of the day, not liking something doesn't make it bad. If you don't like a particular food, that doesn't make the food pointless, because somebody else does like it. So for me, I've tried to move away from the concept of having to know more than everyone else, and taking pride in that in a kind of irrelevant way, and also telling other people what they should like, which is, I'm sorry to say, a big problem in the car community. It's something which I hate to see, because the videos that I do, I try to never tell people what car they should like. I just give them the information to make their own decision, which is why there are so few episodes in the series about cars that you should not buy. And the reason why you shouldn't buy them isn't because of an opinion, it's because of the facts that I've amassed, making those cars fully irrelevant. So as far as kind of the changes of my love for racing games, it really did, as I said, start with GT2, then it got re-engendered with GT4, and it kind of never stopped since. Now after GT4, I went over to Forza. Started with Forza 2, then Forza 3, then Forza 4, then Forza Horizon 1, and then I came back to Gran Turismo with Gran Turismo 6, and then Gran Turismo 5. And then I've kind of played them parallel, I guess you could say now, with Forza 6 and 7, Gran Turismo Sport, etc. And of course on the channel we cover a ton of different stuff anyway, so I'm playing like a dozen games at the same time in effect, all focused on driving and racing. So that aspect of the nerdy, geeky side of me is still there, for sure. That hasn't changed. I've just chosen to channel it in a different way. And I guess that's kind of my story as far as being into racing games. Cars have always just been a part of me. I love cars. That will probably never change. I love motorbikes as well. And there are plenty of other things that I love as well, like movies. And of course I have a whole channel for that. But cars have always been kind of the forefront for me. Because although there are certain motorbikes that I like even more, it tends to be cars as a whole that I like the most. Whereas I love specific motorbikes, I'm not just a blanket motorbike fan. And I guess you could say I'm not a blanket car fan either, because there are some that I don't like, but I think you know what I mean. As an overall class of vehicle, I prefer cars. So I guess that's my story. And as I said, of course you could slap yours down below too, and the great thing about it is pretty much every person will have a different reason, a different experience of how they got into it, how maybe they went off it and came back for it, or came back to it for a while. So, of course, I'd love to hear that down below. As far as the next topic in the video, it's a completely different one, but one which I think definitely deserves to be talked about, and that is, as I said, Polyphony's marketing tactic change, or kind of a change that we had this month. Because, of course, we saw the release of the 1.23 update, but more specifically than that, we had a ton of info released about it well before it actually dropped. Now, we have had that before. Of course, back after GT Sport was first released, we had the announcement of a certain amount of cars, a certain amount of features and updates coming to the game. I believe it was 50 cars. We had all of those, but then it went quiet. And that was a shame not just for Polyphony, but I'll be honest, a shame for me as well, because I definitely have seen a drop in viewership, even on videos that would have got double the views before, because of that. Because at the end of the day, we live in a society, as PewDiePie would say, but we live in a society that it demands instant gratification. So as soon as you stop giving people information, they don't care about you anymore. So as soon as Polyphony stops releasing info about new updates, there is a certain portion of the community, a very large portion apparently, as far as the views showed, that will lose interest very quickly, because at the end of the day, they only love the game because they're looking forward to what's coming out on it next. That's unfortunate, and I have touched on that point in the What's the Future of Gaming Culture video, and racing game culture in particular, where it is this instant gratification culture that also leads to stuff like loot boxes, and of course microtransactions that are now a part of GT Sport again, or a part of Gran Turismo again in GT Sport. So that's another topic entirely, and if you want to know my thoughts on those things, just watch that video. But talking more specifically on the point of their marketing this month, and whether or not it was a good idea, whether or not they're going to continue, I think as far as if it was a good idea, I don't think anyone would argue that it's not. It was an excellent idea, and the proof can be seen from even just here on this small channel, or relatively small, the spike in viewership, the spike in people coming to the channel to check out those videos, and we haven't even done a huge amount of them yet. I did the overall review, I've done 2 tune setups and 3 reviews. That's all I've done for the new pack so far, and of course it's going to cover at least the coming week as well, if not the next one, and then we'll be back into doing just the whole game again. But the point is, it can't possibly be a bad thing, because the whole reason why people stopped playing the game is because they stopped getting info. And it is a very strange choice from whoever leads the marketing department of Gran Turismo, or the team involved, the sub-team perhaps, because it's pretty basic stuff that you need to keep people in the loop. Not just as far as teasers, but as far as actual dates. Because it's all well and good saying you're going to get such and such eventually, but people's patience will only last so long, and they'll just start playing other games. Now, once you've bought the game, you could say, well, who cares at that point? Well, Kaz cares, because as he's proven, he's more of an artist than a businessman. So of course he wants people playing the game, because otherwise what was the point of having all of this FIA integration and all of this other stuff that is geared towards having the biggest possible audience enjoying that? It's not just about the money there. And of course, Kaz probably didn't make the choice to bring microtransactions back. He probably had the final say on it, or at least maybe the shareholders, but I doubt it was his suggestion. That's totally a business side of thing to do. So with that all in mind, I think that it's definitely something that Polyphony should do again. And it's not like it's a difficult thing. Making a teaser trailer does not take that long. Trust me, I make videos every day. I know how long it takes to make videos. Teasers do not take that much effort. But the benefits that you can glean from taking the effort and the time to release multiple teasers has so much benefit. There is no negative cost to producing teasers, but there are immeasurable benefits. I mean, just think of them. Hype alone is a formidable marketing tool these days. Hype alone is almost worth more than billboards are. The billboard is the staple of advertising, and it has been for decades. But these days, the hype of a fandom or the hype of a community can be more powerful than that, because people and word of mouth are a much more influencing source than a billboard. A billboard doesn't pressure you, it doesn't talk to you, it just presents an image for you to look at with maybe a name and a date. Peer pressure, on the other hand, is a powerful thing. And of course, fandom and hype are parts of that. So yes, Polyphony should definitely do that again. Now, whether or not they will, it seems like an obvious choice. Of course they should do that every month, release these little teasers to get the hype going. And it also means that people actually know what's happening. And surprise, surprise, people actually appreciate being in the loop. I mean, who'd have guessed, right? But when you keep people in the loop, It makes them feel wanted. It makes them feel welcome. Whereas if you just drop random stuff without telling anyone until like a day before, well, how could you possibly expect to have people know until like a week after it's dropped? They might hear from the word of mouth, but nowhere near as much as you would with those teaser videos. So I would definitely say Polyphony needs to keep that going. However, I will also say that I think it was not too long ago on GT Planet that they posted an article, I think it was, about Polyphony hiring someone for it was either media team, like a social media team, or a marketing team, a new assistant or a new head or something like that. I can't recall exactly what the job was. And maybe they've hired someone, because it would seem that they might have. If this month is any indicator, then it's somebody who actually knows what they're doing. And that's good, because they need someone like that. So I'm hoping that they continue this methodology next month and in pretty much any coming month that they plan to release packs or updates or cars or whatever the case may be, because look at the hype that we've had. The hype gradually escalated over the month. We had little drip feeds of a location with some mountains and a bridge, then some road with the same bridge but in more detail, then adding avatars in scapes, then suit livery editors, helmet livery editors, and then the silhouettes. That is how you do marketing, because it gets people ready, it gets people to anticipate, it increases the hype, and all of these little videos are so shareable. That is such a huge thing as well. A silhouette picture isn't overly shareable. It is, but not really. Once you've seen it, you've seen it. Whereas a little, say, 10 or 20 second video, people love sharing that kind of thing on Twitter, on Instagram. And again, that is the peer pressure, that is the hype that you need to use when you're in such a competitive market as the racing game world. Because as I've said before, as a number of you guys agree with and have also said, you can't rest on your laurels in the racing world. Gran Turismo had a monopoly. That is gone now. They do not have the monopoly anymore. Forza is a powerful force in the racing world, and so is Assetto Corsa, Project Cars, and a number of others. So they can't afford to lose a step. And at the end of the day, the payoff of releasing a couple of 10-second teasers, that's not exactly a lot to ask. It keeps us in the loop as a community, it builds hype, which benefits marketing, which gets more people to play the game, which, by the way, means that all of those people playing the game for that amount of time are not playing the rival games, which also makes people have a better experience with Gran Turismo and more likely to buy the next game, which is kind of important, if you want to actually have a job at least. So yeah, they should definitely keep it going. I'm not going to bet that they will, though, because after all, this is Polyphony. They're not exactly the most consistent people around, unless, of course, consistency is releasing things after they're supposed to come out, because they're pretty good at that. But I hope that they do. I hope that they do this again. It was a very good marketing scheme. Well done to Polyphony. I think it was an interesting pack. Of course, my thoughts on the pack are out there as far as little things that could have been done better or that I wasn't fully happy with. And you can't fully please everyone. But, of course, there is a difference between saying, oh, I wanted this car, and this car just doesn't sound right, which, of course, has been an issue in this pack. But, overall, those are my thoughts on the marketing of this month. Good idea. Please do it again. And my thoughts as well on how I got into racing games. So, of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts and ideas down below as to those things. Do you think it will continue? Do you think that Polyphony made a good choice? Do you think there's stuff that they could do better in regard to marketing, in effect? But, of course, that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next week. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.